Hi there, my name is Kelly Walker, and I'm presenting my vision for the future of middle school science classrooms with the use of educational technology. In our current state of an ever evolving technology based world, educators are tasked with not only keeping up with those changes, but using and implementing them in their classroom in meaningful ways. Technology isn't just a tool in the backgrounds anymore. It's become a driving force in how we teach and how we learn. So, for today's students to be world ready, instruction has to include the ongoing adaptation to these digital tools and technology. It integrates more than just flashy visuals, and it opens a door to immersive learning that traditional methods um, can't always provide alone. Being clear, the instruction with lecture and notes are still really valuable for the learner, but we can enhance the experience with technology. So, this can increase student engagement and transform learning from passive to active hands on experiences that are better for learning retention. Over the past 10 years, I've had the opportunity to work closely within middle school science, focused mostly on sixth grade level, but I've been within the eighth grade and seventh grade range as well. And from my experience within this setting, science instruction has really become kind of stagnant, where we're often overly focused on the eighth grade exam preparation and we're less focused on long term retention and deep understanding. We're really just trying to get them to that eighth grade level where they can review the content and take that state exam. Um, for many of the Florida middle school educators, and again, especially in eighth grade, the structure for science instruction revolves heavily around preparing for those exams. So, this includes even a designated almost like 8 or 9 weeks of review toward the end of the year that they're reviewing all science content from middle school. So you're looking at sixth, seventh, and eighth grade content. And, understanding that middle schoolers, yes, are changing and developing, and, they're not going to retain all of that information from all 3 years for their May science test. However, it feels like a lot of time is being wasted almost on this review when we don't spend enough time on the front end really making sure that these students are retaining this information. So that review is great for boosting test scores, but what are the students really retaining and learning? Or are they just, putting it into their short-term memory for recall so that they can take the test and then dump it later on? So we really are looking for this change so that students can move past that temporary recall moment and actually have a long-term connection, and see the value in the content, instead of just for passing a test. For my own personal vision for the middle school science classroom, it's not so much completely changing and redirecting, but taking what we have and adding to it. So, that basic instruction with the current lessons that we have, which are very heavily vocab based and article based and lecture based, where students are getting the information, putting it in their brains for a little bit, and then we're moving on to the next topic because we've got to hit that benchmark. We've got to hit the next, test prep step. Which, of course, is a challenge with the way that curriculum is designed and timed out. But if there's a way that we could speed run through the introduction piece and allow the students more time to process and use the content, I feel that this kind of almost blended classroom would work better for that long-term retention. So if we look at learning theories like information processing, which is all about how we're placing it into our memory and recalling that information, or constructivism, where we are looking at real world engagement and finding relatable pieces and applying our knowledge to those relatable pieces, we could actually implement different educational technology like augmented reality or any kind of technology so that students get that hands-on active experience. Because when you think about like sixth grade content, for example, there's not a lot of labs that we can do to give them the hands-on experience, unfortunately. When we're talking about the water cycle, it becomes a lot of diagrams and pictures and videos, and those are great to start explaining, but there's no way we can set up a lab that's kind of on a short-term scale so that they can actually interact with it. So implementing something like augmented reality where students can actually place a water cycle environment on their desk and click and see the consequences and see how these pieces are interacting, it's going to make that content click a little bit better than just drawing a picture and labeling it with the vocabulary terms. So with this future vision, we're looking to make a cognitive shift and move the scientific knowledge from a short-term recall to a long-term memory through interaction. Following information processing theory could strengthen middle school science instruction, and we could allow that shift beyond memorization. So the information processing theory focuses on how learners are absorbing, storing, and retrieving information. It states that learners retain content better when they're interacting with it in a meaningful way. So instead of simple facts, learners process information more deeply when they can actively hands-on work with it. Science, especially in middle school, is very abstract to their middle school brains, and some students have a hard time envisioning this concept. Like if you're talking about organelles in a cell, they have a hard time making that connection because they can't actually see and interact with that cell aside from like pictures or videos again. Educators have to assume that their students are not just going to magically make those connections when they hear the information, and we have to facilitate that connection, and using something like augmented reality could make that connection for the students because they can actually interact with the content. So if I give an example from sixth grade science, traditionally students, we learn about the water cycle through a drawing diagram that they label with the vocabulary terms. And this is really a surface level recall learning situation. When we apply the theory and bring in instructional technology, students can actively use and interact with the knowledge to get a better understanding. So if you imagine a student interacting with a digital simulation that walks through the water cycle and it compares it across different ecosystems, each time the student is using and applying the steps in those different scenarios, they're creating a consequence and reinforcing the learning. So they're in different environments and they're seeing precipitation. It might fall as different forms in different environments, but you're still getting that idea that precipitation is the condensing of that water molecule and it falling back down to Earth's surface. So to get the most out of the lesson and assess the recall, you can finish that lesson with a scenario or question that is pushing them to analyze or synthesize and apply their knowledge so that they can promote it to the final step or of long-term retention. Another learning theory to apply is constructivism. Constructivism is a learning theory where students are building their own understanding through experience, interaction, and reflection. Unlike passive learning, this is more of an active process. Students will apply their content to real-world problems, so they're not just hearing the information, but they're actually using the information. In this theory, students become almost like the creators of their education. They are taking the content and they're working with it, trying to solve a problem instead of being told step by step how to go about solving the problem. They're challenged to develop their own solutions and share their creative ideas through discussion and collaboration. This is empowering them, and it helps them to see the value of what they're learning in real life, and not just focusing on, I got to remember this until the test, and then dump it from their brain. Giving an example from a current 6th grade classroom again, students currently complete a home-based project where they build a balloon-powered race car to demonstrate Newton's laws of motion. And when they're at home, there's not a lot of limit. They can be very creative. They can use whatever materials they have at home. And their only goal is to bring the car in on race day and have their car move 1 meter. So there's not a lot of actual connection between the laws of motion and this project. So here's how we would kind of adjust it to make the lesson far more effective using the constructivist theory. If we bring the project into the classroom and make it more collaborative, students would have a limited number and a limited set of specific materials, and they're actively having to work together to solve the problem of getting this car to move with what they have. They'd have to actively test their car various times. They'd have to record data, review and redesign their cars multiple times, and then reflect on the outcomes. At the end, we could have them present their cars instead of in a race, but demonstrating the laws of motion using their data as evidence. So instead of simply building the car, they're actually constructing an understanding of the laws of motion. Using these two learning theories, we can really shift away from that passive, fast-paced session of learning and toward more active learning experiences. It does take away some time from the curriculum pacing, and that is definitely very hard in the way that science is currently structured in middle school. But we really want students to engage with content early on so we can increase retention instead of having to reteach the same material year after year. And if we're able to accomplish that, then we can restructure the curriculum with different timings and pacings, because we're not looking for that 8 weeks of review time. So as we envision the future of these classrooms, augmented reality has the potential to transform science instruction. It's providing an interactive and immersive experience that today's students need but often lack. Augmented reality creates a learning environment where digital content like text or images, animations are overlaid into a real-world setting. Students will interact with this content in real time using devices that they're familiar with. So it makes learning very visual and engaging and immediate because they're within a setting that they're already comfortable and it's happening right there in front of them. Augmented reality is especially powerful for teaching because it really helps bring those abstract and invisible concepts to life. Students can build on what they already know and apply that knowledge and explore and test these real-world scenarios, making the learning more relevant and motivating. Because we're bringing those abstract science ideas to life, it's building a bridge between this idea that is, really only seen on paper to what is familiar to them and what they already know. So this makes learning not just something that the students hear, but actually they can see it, they can touch it, and then experience it, which totally would transform the middle school classroom. Again, if you think about the example with cells, if they're able to pull up a model that's 3D and click and see the movement of, the mitochondria or the packaging of the Golgi apparatus, and actually play with it and have a hands-on experience, they're going to retain that information more than if they're just coloring in a picture of a cell. So using that cell example, Augmented reality, there's a ton of really great resources out there and applications. And there was one called the Merge Explorer app, and it's really designed with a ton of different science simulations in mind. And they have one where you can walk through a three-dimensional cell. So the cell, again, you place it within your setting. You're able to either stand up and move around and walk around the cell, or you can move your device, and you're able to interact and click on and learn and read about these different organelles that are within the cell. If we were to apply this in the classroom, this would be that hands-on experience where it's no longer a passive, reading about or watching a video, but they're actually interacting with the organelles while they're working. They could take notes, and they would do like an analogy comparison to kind of reinforce that memory in the application. So we do have a project known as the Cell Analogy Project that students are asked to select a specific setting, and they connect each of the major pieces of that setting to one of the organelles of a cell. So for example, the Golgi apparatus is known as like the packaging center of the cell. So it packages up proteins, ships them off to different areas in the cell. So we use the example like the post office will package up packages and then send it off wherever it needs to go. And they would draw that on their image to create that analogy. That can be really hard and abstract for those students when they're trying to make that connection with just seeing pictures. But if they're able to add the augmented reality where they can twist and turn and click and explore and see, it could make that analogy connection a whole lot easier. So they're making correct connections, and they're going to remember it because they're relating it to something that they already know. Augmented reality in science provides a lot of benefits, and we've talked a lot about where it can make those abstract invisible systems visible. So cells, the solar system, right? We can't take the kids to space, but if they're able to interact with a simulation, they can actually see the distances, they can see the size differences, the force of gravity working on orbits, and they're able to make that connection a little bit easier. Because of this, because they can click and use a device and interact with something hands-on, it's going to increase the engagement and motivation of the student. They do get, especially sixth graders, they get pretty excited when you say, hey, you can take your phone out and do X, Y, and Z. So if they're able to interact with that system through a device, something they're already familiar with, they're going to be more encouraged to do it instead of if you told them to write a paragraph about whatever the topic is. It's really great because when a lot of your classrooms are now technology based, they provide a lot of devices, so you have that opportunity to have a one-on-one experience where the student is with the augmented reality, and it's the two of them. The student can work at their own pace. They can read, see the visuals, click, see the consequences, and this is going to have a great benefit for all variations of learners. Your gifted kids are able to go deeper into a topic, whereas your language learners are going to be able to see a picture and see the vocabulary term and make that connection, and just really help them through that process a little bit easier. And then, of course, using technology in the classroom is going to benefit the students beyond the science content because it's really readying them for the future. Education, again, is so intertwined with technology, and real life is so intertwined with technology that having these skills embedded within the curriculum now is only going to help them be more comfortable as they get to the future. With all implementation of technology, there's always going to be limitations and questions and concerns about putting this technology into a classroom. For example, device access. Yes, a lot of schools are shifting, but for example, in our school, we get a set of 25. And if I have a classroom with 27 students, now it's not one-to-one for the device availability. So that could be a limitation. The access to internet might be a little bit of a limitation depending on where you're at and your connectivity. Classroom management during the AR use for example, if students are using their own devices, you always have that hesitation where making sure that they are on the right application, they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, they're not taking pictures, texting, whatever it might be. And then, of course, teacher training and their confidence. It's the AR isn't going to work effectively in the classroom if the teachers aren't able to implement it effectively. So they have to take the time to learn the technology, and all of that time, when you look at what teachers put into a classroom already, it could seem like a whole extra step that they really aren't going to want to implement, because what they're doing right now is fine for the test scores. So finding a way to help these teachers build that confidence so they can implement the technology is really going to help move the classroom forward. So to help these teachers, build that confidence and effectively bring augmented reality and other technology into science classrooms, educational technologists have to take an active role. So one of the most important tasks is going to be to evaluate and curate an appropriate list of AR tools for the appropriate curriculum. So they should be the ones sorting through the overwhelming number of applications and not placing this upon the educators. And then while they're sorting through, they should be recommending only those that are aligning with the current curriculum goals and learning goals. Once selected, those educators that are in the classroom should receive appropriate time to learn the resources, and the educational technologists should be providing targeted professional development, helping those educators build their confidence and competence with the augmented reality tools. The training should go beyond just telling them what it is and the technical use of the application. It should include lesson modeling and strategies so that they can effectively have the students use the device and the tools, and also help them to manage their classroom when those students are on the devices. So again, it's begin with the educational technologists making sure that they are selecting appropriate apps and augmented reality experiences that align with the learning goals for the educators and their curriculum. And then we really want to focus on the teacher readiness so that they are able to implement it with their students effectively. With the educational technologists, it should really be a team role. Once the educators have it in their hands, the technologists should also still be active with the classroom implementation. So they should be collecting data to ensure the schools have correct devices, they have the setup for the augmented reality use, and that the teachers feel supported, that they're not going at it alone. Collecting the data is also going to help provide feedback. So how well those selected apps are fitting the learning goals. And the evidence is not only going to help those students, but also encourage the integration across more schools. So implementing augmented reality in middle school classrooms holds real promise for transforming how the students are going to learn and retain information. There's always going to be challenges when adopting new technology, but the benefits, like the increased engagement and improved content retention, are so significant that it's worth a shot. The current instructional model falls a little bit short in helping students rate and apply scientific knowledge long term. But by aligning the curriculum with learning theories like constructivism, we can offer students more hands-on and meaningful learning experiences. Augmented reality really brings those abstract concepts into the real world, and it helps the students bring what they know and combine it with these new complex ideas. So through the interactive exploration and real-world problem solving, students are building a deeper understanding and stronger critical thinking skills. When educators and the educational technologists are collaborating, this isn't just possible, but it's completely practical. We can create classrooms where science comes to life and learning lasts well beyond the test. On this slide, you can find a list of my references that helped me process and formulate this vision for future middle school science classrooms. Thank you for attending my presentation, and I hope that together with this information, we can help move middle school science classrooms and all education K through 12 classrooms forward in the use of educational technology.